Today, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Now, you know from listening to this show that our money is broken. Fortunately, we have Bitcoin, a better money that will help us build a brighter future. But if you don't have a Bitcoin strategy and a trusted partner to help you execute that strategy, then you're probably going to fall behind. Now, I've known the Swan Bitcoin team for years. The Bitcoiners at Swan are mission-driven and have deep expertise and respect in the Bitcoin space. In my opinion, this is the team you want on your side. Today, I'd like to highlight Swan's Private Client Services division, which guides high net worth individuals and businesses around the world toward building and preserving wealth with Bitcoin. So visit swanprivate.com and learn how this concierge service gives you direct access to your dedicated Bitcoin advisor by phone, messaging, and email. Swan will guide you on complex areas such as self-custody, or you can choose to hold your Bitcoin through Swan with one of the largest US regulated custodians. So make your first purchase with Swan Private and get $100 of Bitcoin. Just tell them that I sent you. You know, an opportunity like this to build and preserve legacy impacting wealth for your family and company will not likely be seen again in our lifetimes. Sign up at swanprivate.com today, mention Breed Love to your advisor, and get $100 in free Bitcoin when you make your first buy. Oswaldo Lairet, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Hi, how are you, Robert?
Doing great. It's great to have you here. Just by way of quick introduction for my audience who may not know who you are the CIO of Systemic Risk Averse Funds. And you've got a very interesting background. You are an aeronautical engineer with a master's in corporate finance, an MBA, and you have a 20-year career at some of the largest banks in the world. And our conversation today, I think, is going to draw on your experience and expertise quite heavily as we start to explore the game theory underpinning the modern global financial order. So this is going to be a big episode. I'm really excited for it. We've got a lot to work our way through. So why don't we start with kind of a primer here on evolutionary game theory. Now, you mentioned to me offline that there are, I guess what I would ask you to do is describe evolutionary game theory. Like what does it even mean for people that are not familiar with it, let's say. And then you mentioned to me offline that there were some differential equations formulated back in the 1920s. Could you unpack some of that for us? What is evolutionary game theory? What are differential equations, by the way? I don't think a lot of people know what that is. And how is this relevant to the rest of the conversation we plan on having today?
So thank you for asking. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to spread more. Let's start by telling people how human beings, we are not instantly aware, we don't perceive immediately some of the complexities that develop mathematically around us. That's why science seems to be a bit complicated for most people, because it's just not intuitive. So a lot of the math, the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the ecology that you deal with in the scientific world requires some heavy deducting and thinking that is not necessary for everyday life. So the way finance has been managed, at least for the last 300 years, is by making it easy for you, making people think that they can tell a complex dynamic system like a human society with plus signs and minus signs and arithmetics. Mm-hmm. Basically, I'm talking about Keynes and just about every economist that has come after him. Mm-hmm. People who want to make you believe that you can put together the development, production of a country under one sum of four elements, of which, by the way, they forgot to put in the fifth, which is dead, and they did that on purpose.
Mhm.
And no, human societies are just like any ecosystem. We are live creatures, and dealing with us is, trying to understand how we do things economically is as complex as trying to understand any ecosystem. We are dynamic. We are continuously on and off, just like every ecosystem out there, whether it's insects or predators or whatever, bacteria. All living things are ruled by complex dynamics. And a couple of scientists back in 1925 developed a formula for the first time ever that is called the Lotka-Volterra equation, predator-prey equation, because they noticed that the fish around the Italian area had practically disappeared because sharks had grown too much, the population of sharks. And that's what they started, one of them started looking into how could he basically tell what was going on and predict how that would end up back to equilibrium. And so he mixed two dynamic equations, which are called differential equations, ordinary differential equations. And he took the function of the reproduction of both types of fish, the sharks and the other fish, and over time played out what that function would produce using the differential equation for it. And that's what you can do with any ecosystem where there's a feedback system between two factors. And in the case of humans, we have exactly the same thing going on. And quite a few smart and very knowledgeable economic scientists have already done this since the 1960s. The last one and most famous of them, and that's the reason I mention him so much in some of my writings, is Hyman Minsky. Minsky was able to trace what Kondratiev did back in Russia before the turn of the 20th century and then after, before he was killed. And then he followed Koglarov, and he followed, the really big mathematicians in economics that have been shut out of the mainstream, precisely because they discovered how economics really work. And if you read their work, it's amazing. You get to understand everything that I wrote there. And what there is to understand is very simple. Debt has an internal rate of return, which is automatic. It doesn't need to be higher than the internal rate of return of income, which, by the way, is pretty similar to the internal rate of reproduction of population, because we, to develop income, to make the development of production, when they call GDP, they're talking about developing production, you need a lot of coordination, a lot of effort, a lot of schooling, a lot of ingredients. Whereas even if you charge a small compound interest with debt, the thing will automatically compound and become a monstrosity exponentially, much sooner than any internal rate of return of income, of GDP. And that's exactly what happens. It takes regularly, from what they found and what I found myself, it takes anywhere from 50 to 100 years for the financial cycle, the debt part of the equation, to eventually be so much larger exponentially than the income derivation, that what that tells you is that feedback loop is going to end up in collapse. And that's what they call an unstable feedback loop in engineering. That's the dynamics of not just evolutionary, but circuits and just about anything where there is a feedback loop. We all know what an unstable feedback system is, and that is a system that ends up in collapse. And that's what happens to us every 50 to 100 years, depending on the society, depending on the place. We end up in collapse because we have an accumulating debt interest that is unpayable and becomes less and less unpayable from the income that is produced by society. And that's why we are getting close right now to the end of this debt cycle. This particular debt cycle started back in 1971. And that's the reason why, if you read the article that I wrote, I use the chart from 71 onwards, because that's where you see how those two curves start pretty similar, same size. And eventually what I'm telling you happens, which is the blue one, the financial cycle, the one that comes from interest, goes exponentially higher. Any other, you want me to go?
No, that's a great introduction. Thank you for elaborating on that. And I'll try to echo some of that back to you here.
Sure.
So we have evolutionary game theory, and we should mention here too, we're drawing on a paper you prepared. This is a one pager, actually. It's very, very dense, but potent, titled Predator and Prey Economics. And we'll link that in the show notes. But we essentially have evolutionary game theory that describes interactions among organisms. And typically we focus on the predator and prey relations, as these are universal, right? If you've ever watched the Discovery Channel, I think you'll understand that, a lot of animals eat other animals. And so there are certain population dynamics that take place between them. A lot of these are describable with differential equations, as you said, that were developed in the 1920s. But for humans, there's something kind of unique in that these dynamics have manifested in the economic sphere, right? That we actually have predators of property,
yes,
or wealth, and we have those that own or create the wealth, or have the property relationship, that are being preyed upon. And your paper specifically demonstrates that there's a mathematical relationship here, that the internal rate of return on debt outpaces the internal rate of return on income over time. And that's what drives these systems to collapse, right? The actual prey gets predated fully or nearly fully. So the property and wealth of the prey collapses, which means the predator has nothing else to prey on. So the predator collapses. And what we're saying here when we say that, these aren't animal populations. This is civilization, right? This is the basis of civilization, property. It's just that you own the fruits of your labor. You own yourself and you own the fruits of your labor. And well, I guess another way to say this perhaps is that those who systemize the management of debt or the predation of private property are preying on those that work and create real economic value. So this would be the financial class, roughly speaking, right? They're just moving paper around, connecting buyers and sellers, but not adding any real economic value, not making buildings or factories or food, nothing that people actually consume. They're just connecting buyers and sellers, are preying on those that do create real economic value, right? The working class. And this entire relationship is describable in these fairly well put together set of equations and evolutionary game theory, right? That we've had for, about 100 years at this point.
And they're really simple. That's what they call ordinary differential equations. They're the simplest you can get.
Yes. So I guess, it sounds a bit radical, but what we're doing here, I think, is you're kind of removing the veil that there's a politician or someone in a position of government or working on Wall Street will represent themselves as someone that's adding value or organizing society or helping civilization exist. But it's actually the exact opposite, right? If you are a beneficiary of taxation or inflation, you're effectively a parasite on the human enterprise. That you're taxing, right? You're reducing the net wealth creation through the predation of private property. So I think that's a great intro to what we're talking about here. what I'd like to propose, I'd love to hear
I'd
your
like to add
thoughts on
something to
this.
that before you
Yeah,
go to the
please
next.
go ahead.
Okay, I wouldn't call it predation in the sense of exploitation. Human beings are, to me at least, pretty much like animals in the sense that they act in a way that is very, very selfish. And when they're in power, they tend to try to benefit only their own families and their own circles. And that's been going on for tens of thousands of years, of course. So I can't really judge them for being, what we are, humans. The only thing that I'm really pointing out is that scientifically we can prove that's what they're doing completely, and we know why they're hiding it behind an arithmetic, made up science, which is not science, which they call economics. That economics is just a made up Ponzi scheme, just like fiat.
Specifically Keynesian economics.
Specifically that one.
Yes.
And a lot of them before him too. I mean, if you really look at the life of Adam Smith, you'll find out that he was copying Cantillon. And you find so many details you don't want to know about the people that you thought were supposedly honest and knowledgeable, and they were not. They were copying other people, and they didn't really know much. And so eventually what you find is that the only science that I believe in is mathematics, because it just shows you what's going on for real. And then in the end, anybody who's producing value, not just the worker class, anyone like you, for instance, for me, you're one of the people who produces the most value in the internet. And anybody who teaches the world, anybody who tries to make the world better, and makes an effort on it, is creating value. So anybody who's creating value is being taken by the predators in government, essentially, and the cartels who manage government, because I don't believe government manages itself. Mm-hmm. And eventually, technologies that are incredibly smart, and they're creating wealth. And they end up creating it for these guys more than anybody else. So anybody who's creating wealth is being taken a ride. They're taking a ride from him.
Right. Now that's a great clarification that there's a Darwinian impulse for self-preservation, right? This exists in all organisms, and that impulse, in a world where, taking someone's wealth is an option, is something it's an option that's taken, right? If I can enrich myself by taking someone's wealth, maybe not I specifically, but maybe in certain circumstances, me specifically, I would do that, right? I would have an incentive to do that. So the name of the game, as far as I can tell, and we can tease this out further, is to make property violation or taking really expensive or risky or difficult, because the more difficult it is to take people's property, the less profitable it is to be coercive, let's say. And to that point, as in nature, where we see predators engaging in all these unique strategies to get prey, right? Often using camouflage, for instance, it seems like statist government use a moral camouflage or even an intellectual camouflage, perhaps in the case of Keynesian economics, that they represent themselves as doing, right, whatever, you're being locked into your home for your own protection, or you're paying your taxes to support your community, whatever it may be. These are all forms of camouflage the predator is donning effectively to deceive the prey into giving up what the predator wants. So I think in that way, we could say that government is effectively the most organized crime in the world. So when you say there's cartels running the government, I would say they're basically indistinguishable at the highest level, right? It's the most organized form of crime known to man. That's how I would define government.
I agree.
So here's the proposal I'd like to make, and I'd like to tease out with you, is if there was some, and just speaking hypothetically, if there was some way to make property, the relationship between owners and their assets, an inviolable relationship or an unbreakable relationship such that no one could steal anyone else's stuff, this would effectively nullify that predator and prey dynamic, right? It's the predator is preying on the property of the prey. So if they could not prey on that property, then predator and prey relations would be removed from human economic interactions. Now, that's not possible, clearly, because we have property that's in physical space. People can always engage in physical coercion to steal physical things. However, we do have Bitcoin, which we'll talk more about later, that is the first form of property that is extremely expensive to steal, to the point of being impossible if you custody it properly. So my proposal would be, how does something like Bitcoin affect the predator and prey dynamics that you have regarded historically in your work?
Well, unfortunately, I don't quite believe human beings are able to distinguish between their intellectual property, which is the biggest thing they have, and their material property. And if we're talking about material property, yes, I 100% agree. There's only one thing, and I don't know how it came about, because it's a miracle. For me, Bitcoin, and I've been studying for 7 years, because I was looking for something like Bitcoin to come along. And that's the reason why I have that name for my fund. I'll explain why the name is Systemic Risk Averse. And the reason why I don't think people are ever going to be aware of how much they're not showing them and how much they're stealing from them is because human beings are the most amazing creators in the world. They can create wealth out of nothing, out of their minds. And that's the biggest wealth you have. But if you have been inculcated since you were a kid of certain things they've been educating you on, and other things that they're not telling you, for the last 100 years, ever since Rockefeller set up the Board of Education in 1903, they completely changed the American curriculum, and so did the Europeans. And they turned every new generation over the last 100 and some years into people who were too busy. They made them too busy to really understand the world. Especially the first 12, 14 years, the way it used to be, you went from K to 8th. That was it. Anything over 8th is whatever it is, you're keeping me busy for me not to understand what's happening. And so for the last century or so, they came up with the generations they wanted, people who could create a lot of money for them, be it from automobiles, from technology in the airplane business, or whatever, software eventually, and computers. And then they were not really adversaries, because all they knew was to create wealth out of their mind, but they didn't know why they had to do it the way they were doing it and who was benefiting from it. And so that is possibly the best kind of slave you can have, because that's a slave that is immensely productive. I mean, no other animal, robot, anything on earth can produce as much as a human being with his intellect. And then he thinks one way or another that what's going on is fine and is fair, and he spent the first 18 years of his life not really learning what was going on, and so he's never going to question it, and he's going to spend the whole life until he goes to 60, whatever, 70, and gave away most of his intellectual value and creation to these cartels. And so the only way that you can defend your property is by understanding. That's why I appreciate people like you so much, or Michael Saylor. People who tell the world how things really work. Because that's, to me, that's the only freedom you can get. Understanding.
No, that's well said, and I appreciate you saying that. So I guess we could say at least that Bitcoin is a step in the right direction towards getting
Oh yeah,
unbreakable or less breakable property, which can help ameliorate the predation of one class of people on another class of people. And it's a bit ironic here too, and I want to get into your experience in Venezuela, because socialism sort of ideologically identifies the problem, perhaps in a way that there's a predator-prey dynamic going on, but then it, Marxism specifically prescribes the exactly wrong solution, which is to abolish private property rather than make private property stronger. So maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the history of Venezuela that you've seen up close and personal. I know you said that they were just undergoing an absolute economic boom, right? In multiple commodities for many decades, until basically socialism was implemented. I think you said in the early 1960s.
Yes, 61.
Yeah.
Well, let me go back just 1 minute because it's so funny that I analyze things the way you do, because I go to the bottom behind what's happening right now. Isn't it funny that Angels was all the time financing Marx, and his father's company was a beneficiary of people not knowing what the hell they were doing with their life and their money and their freedom? And isn't it funny that Herbert Matthews spent almost 10 years, making Fidel Castro a hero in the eyes of the United States and the eyes of the rest of the world? Isn't it funny that Trotsky got $20 million in financing? And, you can look up the name. I don't want to name people, but it's in the books. It's public. It's in the libraries. It's everywhere. From a certain banker that was very well known back then. And then isn't it true? I mean, this is even more public, that JP Morgan financed the Bolsheviks. So why are these cartels for the last 300 years? Because this didn't start in the beginning of the 20th century. This started in 1692 with the Central Bank of London. Bank of London was really created by membership of half private and half public. You couldn't really call them public because they were not part of the public. They were congressmen. They were people with power in Congress. And they put it together in a way that William could get financing, because Charles before him, died without paying almost £1 million. And so to make sure that William got his money for the war that he was fostering at the time, they created a private or semi-private institution, private in the eyes of everybody else, but because they didn't know the congressman intervention. And so this Bank of England basically started buying treasury bonds, IOUs. Back then it was called treasury, from the government, from William's government, and from King William, and then the government paid 8%. That was a great coupon to get. And so somehow the rest of the banking system, the private banks that were the only type of banks that you had there, saw the whole scheme as that's not government. That's IOUs that this really a powerful bank, which is managed by some really powerful people, are buying, and they're making 8% of it. And so when they came and to sell them those bonds or part of their bonds, they also told them that they could use them to discount them at the Bank of England window and get 90 cents on the dollar for each of them. So they were practically making money. Just, everything that you hear around you here, that the banks are making are actually the ones that are printing the money. That's been going on for 300 years. Started 1692. So anyhow, this whole thing began taking over, and then Germany did it, and then Amsterdam, who was way ahead of them, who didn't do the right thing, basically, because it didn't do this Ponzi scheme. Well, they also went ahead and copied it. So everybody in Europe started copying the system, and the system is now all over the world. That's a system that's in Venezuela. Venezuela and all these countries of ours are really the model of what the Bank of England created, and we all are. United States too. United States, the first time they tried was 1781, even before the Constitution, and Jefferson shut it down. Basically, it was him and his group that said, don't renew it, and they went down in '83. Then the next central bank you guys came up with was in 1787 or 89, right after the Constitution. Hamilton was able to put together something with what's his name, the famous banker of all times from England. So anyhow, he put the whole thing together. They got it together. Until 34 or 1834, 32, that Jackson basically did not renew it, and it was a major fight. That's when the second central bank went down, and then they were able to do it again at the beginning of the 20th century by financing Woodrow Wilson. So anyhow, what we have here, it's a systematic interest in the world becoming socialist. Why? Because guess what? The only competition we have is these people here who are very productive. Why do we need all these other people out there competing against us? If anything, they're going to get very well armed. They can become a major enemy. Let them have socialism. Okay, great. Let them neutralize themselves. Let them kill themselves, right? They don't even understand what they're doing. Okay, so let's finance that thing as much as we can. Let's have Africa, Latin America, whichever stupid European country takes it. And we're getting rid of all kinds of people at the same time. So that's my my piece right before I talk about Venezuela.
That's a great. So we could say, maybe to fit into the framework of this conversation, that banks have been predatorial for 300 plus years.
Yes.
And Venezuela is just running the same playbook, right?
Exactly. And all these things that I just said, they are proven. It's important for your audience to understand that I'm not just mentioning things. All of this is proven and it's public.
And okay, we should condition it too and say we're talking specifically about central banking here. This is not depository or investment banking. Now they're all enmeshed and intertwined, but it's really the central bank and the legal monopoly, the coercive legal monopoly on money and money production, that is the problem.
Exactly. And so by the time I was in high school, we had a history teacher who was practically indoctrinating the class into socialism, because Venezuela, and this was right before the oil embargo, Venezuela was being destroyed by the capitalists. Ever since they got into Venezuela, they were expropriating our sub, all the money in the oil wells and taking it away from us and all that. And the guy was just like all the socialism was a big thing in Venezuela. As I said, probably because it was financed and spread by people who were interested in doing that. And so what I had to show the guy, and I did this myself, even though I had a team of 7 other people, I decided to go to the public library in my town, because there was no book in my high school that had it, and showed him with numbers that we were the richest that we had been in 300 years. Meaning, Venezuela was a cocoa exporter in the 1700s, and then it became one of the good coffee exporters in the 1800s. But then it became an oil exporter after 1917, when production began. And by 1957, we were the fourth richest country per capita in the world. And not only that, we were second to the United States in GDP per capita. That's just an amazing feat for a little, territory the size of Texas to accomplish in 40 years, from 17 to 57. But then, ever since the socialists came over and took over the country in 1958, and then put on a socialist constitution, completely central planned, Venezuela started faltering in its oil production, and eventually, by the time of the oil embargo, Venezuela was doing badly because it had been in the hands of the socialists since '58, and this guy was blaming the exact opposite: the people who had helped develop Venezuela's oil fields and had developed our technology, our people. We have so many capable engineers because of them, and well, there you go. That's how people go after money. They took their socialism forward until they completely wiped out the oil industry, and especially over the last 20 years, under another 2,000 stories. And whenever I hear people in the United States and in Europe talking against being conservative about expenses at the government level, not giving away money to other countries in a way to interfere with their internal domestic affairs. I mean, all the things that are logical to do, and I see all these voices coming out against them. Like the enemy is the person who's telling you to be frugal and to be conservative and to do the right thing. That's their enemy. So, and I get reminded that where we're going here is pretty much where we went in Venezuela.
Well, yeah, it seems like a lot of wealth was created, and that is effectively an incentive, right, for predation. That's what the predator wants. They want the wealth. A prey has grown large and fat, if you will, and the predator has a desire to consume the prey. And it seems like Venezuelans, perhaps, this really speaks to the ideological or the narrative plane where these battles take place, because Venezuelans were effectively indoctrinated by this anti-capitalist propaganda, right? That the capitalists were the problem. Yes. And had to be dealt with, which was the exact opposite of the truth. Capitalists that's the result.
Creator.
So I'm sorry, that's the creator of the wealth in the first place. And this is where education is so important, because without understanding the nature of property, Venezuelans had no immunity to the rhetoric of socialists, right? Again, you're back to this Marxist thing where you're sort of properly identifying a problem. There's a predator and prey dynamic, but then you're misprescribing the solution, which is to attack private property rather than to reinforce private property.
Right, because you're dealing with people who don't understand what it is you're doing behind their backs.
Right. So it seems like if we could somehow just educate people about the nature of property, that you might, in future circumstances, have more of a resistance to that rhetoric. Is that how you see it as well, or what other ways do you think we could prevent something like that, prevent what happened to Venezuela from happening again in other countries?
Well, I think what we're doing here is exactly what should be done. People like you and me going over the details of how these things happen and why, and if necessary, proving it. Because I'm always ready to link anything I say. That's why whenever I write something, you're going to see so many links and so many dates and names, because I'd rather not read somebody's opinion until they prove it to me, whatever it is they're saying. And so
Right.
I apply the same technique to myself. And that's so important, because if you don't do that, you could end up saying things that are not true or that are exaggerated. And teaching is such an important task. I mean, what you do every day in Twitter, through this video chats, everywhere, what you're doing is the only thing we can do. That's the only thing that I've been doing for the last, I don't know, 40 years. But of course, we're never going to be, somebody of interest for a media complex that is managed precisely by the governments of Venezuela, the US, Europe, who are the predators. I mean, why would they give you or me or anybody who's really telling people what's going on any time in the air? And if they do, they do it to see if they can somehow discredit you, just like they keep against people.
Yeah, that's a great point. But it does seem like there's a little bit of ground giving way, with the advent of the internet, with perhaps the predator prey dynamic shifting, right? Where the prey is really being pushed to the edge of its economic livelihood. So the people are waking up, like something's wrong with the world. The government's been lying to me about everything. Prices are going up, my wages stay the same. So people are getting net poorer in real terms. So all these pressures, I think, tend to wake people up. What I would like
happens at the end, always. At the end of the cycle ends like that, always.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think what's maybe really important to highlight here is that those who seek to justify the violation of private property, the predators, they are always going to engage in the creation of deceptive models, metrics, or even entire pseudosciences like Keynesian economics, right? Keynesian economics is pseudoscientific bullshit that's intended to justify the printing and legal monopolization of money. That's just all it is. You can, debate me about that or what have you, but I don't try to say things with a lot of certainty.
I can prove that mathematically with several of the equations. By the way.
Exactly. So we could say perhaps that the state really is, despite what we've been led to believe over these past 300 years, especially, that it's some type of almost a replacement for religion, perhaps, like this is ideological superstructure. It's really just the predator. It's just the systemized predation of private property, or in other words, it's a system for perpetrating widespread perpetual theft.
In different clothing.
In different clothing, right. And so, and as you said offline before, it only works if the taxpayer is subjugated, right? That there has to be there's not anything to steal unless people are creating something actually of value to steal.
Yes.
So this whole system is built on the back of the working class or taxpayers more generally.
I hate to call it working class because we're all workers, even if we don't have a blue collar job.
You're right.
Spend all day working, and we are being taken advantage of also. So every one of us who's creating value is being taken advantage of, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, people that engage in consensual exchange, right? Because that's what it's all about. If it's consensual, then that means both parties find the trade to be valuable. But if it's not consensual in the form of, as is true with taxation, theft, etc., then one party is getting ripped off, right? There's a reason it's non-consensual. So it's those engaging in non-consensual exchange preying on those that engage in consensual exchange.
And one thing to notice is that the reason that they are letting us be creative is very systematic also. Look at what happened to the socialists and the communists, okay? they completely stopped human credibility from happening.
Right.
They took it down. Okay, they went poor, like they always do, like Venezuela did, because they are so ignorant. It's not just bad and rapacious and grotesque, but ignorant. They're so ignorant. They don't realize the only thing of value is the creativity of those people. You can enslave their minds to think that they are supposed to pay taxes and they're supposed to whatever. I mean, all the terrible things they teach us that are only in their benefit. But it's not. That's all you have to do. You cannot, put a chain on them like Plato's allegory of the cave,
Right.
and put their neck against the wall, because then they're all going to die of hunger, and you too. And that's what's happening in Venezuela. Venezuela and all those countries that did not understand that you got to let the slave, be productive, be free, and think he's free.
Yes.
They're never going to make any money.
Yes, that's a great point. And that lesson seems to have percolated out a bit, because even in China now, right, they've
Yes.
let some vestiges of free market capitalism sort of take hold in agriculture and other areas, just so the state has something to prey upon ultimately. So that's a great point too.
Now I'd like to tell you about a great new Bitcoin show on the scene that you've got to check out. Brought to you by Swan Studios and Bitcoin Magazine, this show is Hard Money with Natalie Brunell. Natalie is an Emmy-nominated journalist bringing unparalleled experience to the Bitcoin media scene. And personally, Natalie is one of my favorite voices in the Bitcoin space. Each week on Hard Money, you'll get the top headlines of the week with analysis you won't find anywhere else. Hard-hitting interviews with amazing guests like myself and other top minds in the Bitcoin space. And the show will take you directly into the lives being changed by Bitcoin all over the world. Check out Hard Money at swan.com/hard money. Today, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Crowd Health. So, how does health insurance work? You send an egregious amount of money to an insurance company. They hold it in a pool of depreciating fiat currency. Then, when you have a large health event, you have to pay them even more via your deductible. And then you hope they will cover your bill. And in fact, 1 in 6 bills are denied by healthcare.gov plans. It's time to take control of your own healthcare bills. I'd like to introduce you to Crowd Health. It's a decentralization of healthcare using Bitcoin as an alternative to health insurance. Instead of sending fiat currency to a big corporation, you send that money to an account controlled by you, a portion of which is converted into Bitcoin. Then, if you have a big health event, you have a community of Bitcoiners that will use the money in their accounts to help you out. To get more details, go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove, where you can find the promo code for $99 a month for 6 months.
It seems to me like there's just no hope without something like Bitcoin, that so long as money was fully monopolized and people had no recourse to a form of property independent of the state that can be at least stored in a way that's extremely difficult to steal, that this system would just, this unstable feedback system, I think as you call it, would just repeat from now until forever. And coupled with this, as you said offline, Bitcoin is the internet. And this gets to a great point I think you made earlier too, that the internet is designed for survivability.
Yes.
Right. And that's the key differentiator here, is that you have a unstable dynamic system that is all but certain to collapse repeatedly.
Always.
And you have this other system that's anti-fragile, right? That always seems to get stronger in conditions of adversity and get stronger with the printing of money and all of this. So is this, where again, where do we go from here? What do you think happens now? Where are we in the current, say, predator-prey dynamic? Where do you
Well,
see the next collapse coming, and how do you see Bitcoin playing a role?
Well, to begin with, for me, Bitcoin is a miracle. And the reason I say that forcefully is because I've been in banking for 40 years. I know banking from the inside out. I was a trader in New York during the Latin debt crisis. I was a regional treasurer for Latin America out of Miami, managing all these countries or the treasuries for one of those banks. I was the head of one of those banks for Venezuela. I mean, I've done every executive job you can do for a bank and know how things go down and how they're done and who does it and all the details. The difference between that and just anybody talking is that you have seen the money come and go in front of you, see all the trades, all the transactions, all the things they do, and all the systems we have to protect the bank from getting robbed from traders, from back office people, from technology people, from clients. Or it's like, the whole world is against you when you're inside the treasury of a bank. And that was my place. My almost my whole banking life I spent in the treasury and money finance, not in credit, any of that, because the heart of the bank is the treasury. That's where the real money goes through. And that's where they can steal from you. That's where you have to, watch and have systems in place. And for instance, one thing that fascinates me about Saylor is how much he knows about treasury. I mean, I've never met any executive out there who knows much about treasury, much less, all the mechanisms that we use in treasury. I mean, for us, when you talk about counterparty risk, custody risk, systemic risk, country risk, I mean, every risk you talk about in the treasury is really one risk: liquidity risk. And if you ask me, who've been in the trenches and in charge of a lot of possible problems to make sure they never happen, that's what I was watching. Every time I was watching the ledgers and the numbers I was asking from people to send me, I was really watching for liquidity thresholds, whatever name you want to call it. So when something like Bitcoin comes along, the reason I say it's a miracle is the following. We were always trying to find not just straight throughput operational transactions, which was, for us, that was like the holy grail in treasury, transactions that take place immediately, because that's the way you're out of a situation of counterparty risk, credit risk, all kinds of risk. And you want to be out of that immediately. You want to have to settlement as soon as possible, and you don't deal with people who cannot settle quickly, and especially large amounts. So here we find not only is the thing settling, and when I say settling, I'm not talking about going back and forth for the next 12 weeks to check our layers between your bank and my bank, or that day something happened and that didn't. No. We're talking about settlement for real in the next 30 minutes, forever. That's something I never heard of in my life, especially in treasury. Second, you are dealing with final assets. I mean, you're dealing with final settlement. You don't have anybody on the other hand, on the other side, like treasuries. The reason why we were like, major percentage invested in treasury, it's because you always keep your U.S. treasuries as a reserve for anything that goes wrong with liquidity in some other area of trading that's producing a lot of money, but it's risky. Okay, treasuries don't make a lot of money, but they take you out of any trouble that presents itself in anything else you're doing: Latin American debt, Russian debt, whatever, leverage capital, anything. And so you gotta have that. You gotta have a lot of that, especially in times of crisis. Then this thing comes along where you can have a lot of that without an IOU, without somebody on the other hand, without somebody who can stop payment or get restructured. That's unheard of. Final settlement in 30 minutes in something that is as good as gold in the sense that nobody owes you on the other hand. And then no counterparty risk. And if you do have counterparty risk because you don't understand Bitcoin, you don't understand what you're doing, you don't understand why you bought that thing. Because anybody who keeps Bitcoin with a counterparty, he's just another speculator. He should be buying the cryptocurrency things that are worthless, because that's the kind of thing you should buy with ignorance. So if you have no custody risk, no counterparty risk, no liquidity risk. Oh, that's another thing. You can send $1 billion of this thing without asking anybody for permission. That's unheard of. So what I found with Bitcoin when I came across and really could not believe it, I spent 2 years not believing it, all right? Because I have to study things to really feel that I understand it better than the people who are telling me whatever they're telling me. And it took me 2 years to, give up. Yeah, right. Okay, the 3 words. And what I could not believe from the beginning, and I ended up believing, was that you could have the perfect treasury asset for a corporation or a bank or a country in that thing. And the minute people start understanding that, and the public is not going to understand that, Robert. Okay, I've tried. There's no way. They just don't have the, like I said at the beginning, human beings are not instantly perceiving anything mathematical. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So for them, anything like that doesn't make any sense. And the people who are going to get it are people like you and I, people who come from that environment, who dealt with that kind of issues and how to solve it, and who are in the central bank somewhere else, in some other central bank, who are in the Ministry of Finance in some other country, and who might be starting to understand that this thing, if the US doesn't want it, or the Europeans don't want it, they're going to take it over. And that's the game theory that, in my way of thinking, is really going to take place. This whole adoption thing about the public is never going to adopt it in mass, with governments telling them that the thing is bad and horrible and all the things they say every day of the week, which are all lies. But the professionals of Treasury, in Treasury, or in corporate finance, in government finance, and in institutional finance, in insurance, they understand everything that I'm talking about. And they will be the ones. The second wave of Bitcoin adoption is going to come from powerful minds who've been through the trenches. Second, like you said, the reason why the thing is indestructible, it's because it's a post-nuclear device. People don't realize that the internet came out of the mind of a genius, Boran, from what's the name? R&D, Rand Corporation. Okay. At that time, it was not a corporation. It was a think tank. Anyhow, he was one of them, and they were giving a lot of time to think and be creative. And he came up with the thought that, listen, in the first 26 hours, and this is the incident between Kennedy and with the situation in Cuba and Nikita Khrushchev. Nobody knew if there was going to be a nuclear attack. And that was a preoccupation since the early 50s, up until this guy offered in 1964 in a paper that I linked. Actually, I'm gonna write this down tonight or tomorrow. I'm gonna send it out.
It's on Distributed Communication Networks, and we'll link it to the show notes.
Excellent. Okay, so anyhow, he basically tells AT&T and the Air Force, which is the people they work for, listen, you cannot have a central dot, a central node that all communications depends on, because all they need to do is take out that node, and for the next 26 hours of attacks, neither this president nor their president is going to be able to react. There's going to be a nuclear war no matter what, because the generals are going to keep on shooting because they get no feedback. So we need to stop that from happening by giving them feedback. And he proposed the system of distributed nodes that are not connected to the local central node. It basically completely responsible, powerful nodes. Each of them can reconnect behind any node that gets destroyed, exactly like the brain works. And that was his his argument was very, very persuasive. The brain will basically go around anything that's happening in your head, if you had an accident or something, and will reconstruct your sight or your audio, your hearing, by going around. And that's what he proposed. That's what we should do. And they were able to do it finally by 1969. They put it together, and eventually the digital age emerged from his idea. And Bitcoin is exactly the same thing. It's a nodal system where no one has control and where everybody has input, which gives the whole world a network, a domestic network in each place in the world that it's impossible to kill. Because every time you kill one, just say you kill all the nodes in China, okay, you shut it down. Okay, guess what? You're making rich everybody else around China who's now gonna be incentivized. Like this actually happened in 1991 in May. You're just making people rich all over the world. You're stupid. You obviously don't understand this thing is unkillable. It's the internet. It's the same thing. You have to live with it, period. So from there to the next step, we have the arguments already set up. First of all, why the next step is not going to be the public adoption, but the sophisticated adoption by very powerful players. And third, how that happens. And for me, that happens at the fiat currency poker table. So you tell me what do you want to do?
No, that's great run there. So just again, to echo a couple of things you said there, we have this asset that is pure equity, right? Or a bearer asset, but simultaneously globally transactable, right? So it's all money and no promise. And as you said, your experience in banking, like you're shuffling promises around, right? You're ultimately trying to get the gold or the least counterparty risk laden asset in your treasury, but you're trying to create alpha too by playing in all these high counterparty risk or high liquidity risk assets. And I guess to put maybe some icing on that cake, the other thing is that you're only going to get this once, right? You can only have money with a fixed supply one time, with a credibly fixed supply. Now we can go and launch, Robert and Oswaldo coin right now and say it has a fixed supply, but that's counterparty risk, right? You have to believe us that we're not going to print more of the thing. So this only happens once, game theoretically. You get one time, one money with an absolutely fixed supply, and it's never going to happen again. But to your point, the profundity of that idea takes some time to permeate people's consciousness. And I think you're right when you say that the people that are intimately familiar with the inner workings of these financial systems are going to get it first. And you sort of already see that, right? Like you alluded to Saylor earlier. He's an engineer, but he's also been a public executive for, 30 years or whatever it is. So it's those types of people that are going to get it first. And you alluded to this, and this is where I think it gets really interesting. I'll just ask an open-ended question, I guess. Obviously there's a lot of implications at the individual or institutional level. What are the geopolitical implications of this going forward? You mentioned to me offline that you see something like maybe the identification that this is a threat to certain Western institutions, perhaps by non-Western institutions, and then this predator-prey dynamic sort of gets seized upon, right? It's an opportunity to thwart your rival, something like that. So, not to lead the question, I'll leave it open-ended. How do you see the geopolitical implications going forward of Bitcoin?
Well, if we've been watching and reading 300 years of evolution of the financial system, you realize that the monetary system is really the blood that makes humanity circulate. It really makes it alive. It contributes to us getting better or more adapted to the surroundings, and like we have done over the last 12,000 years. But the monetary system always is being taken over by somebody. Somebody has always led the monetary system back during the times of Rome or before them until now. So the reason why they take over is because they end up being the beneficiaries of a lot of the creativity and productivity of the people surrounding them that use that monetary system. And so anything that replaces their monetary system is an enemy. It's something that they don't want to happen. And especially when that enemy is impossible to destruct, to defeat. Because you're not talking about Venezuela trying to prohibit the dollar, which is what they did eventually. All these countries, Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela, their only weapon is to destroy their own people. Okay, you don't buy any more dollars. You can only have bolivars, and we take it all. We're going to print bolivars forever in one day, all of them. And that's what they did. And that's what Zimbabwe did. That's what Argentina's doing. That's what all of them do. And that's what this country right now is doing, by the way, over the last 2 years. So the only thing they can do is prohibit their own society from melting their private property. I'm not going to let you, not give it to me. They're forcing that society to basically give them all their money because they know they're going to devalue it, and they have no other way. They always they have to restructure. They have to go through an ego situation where they're going to have to tell the world that they were bankrupt the whole time and they were just passing on the buck. And since 2008, the country has been increasing the size of the hole in the banking network. And having to recognize all of that, not going to happen. So all they're going to do is devalue, just like all these banana republics devalue. And before that, though, you know that if you can convince enough people in your own country that the dollar is bad, anybody who buys dollars is bad. In Venezuela, that was the thing, right? Anybody who was unpatriotic was buying dollars. They were creating cows for Venezuela. That's what you're going to see here. It's going to be a security issue to buy Bitcoin eventually, and they're going to prohibit it to their own society. And so what happens is that the richest, the people in power in Venezuela, Argentina, Zimbabwe, and obviously here, anyone else, who have immense access to liquidity, they already have their channels outside of the country already all set up in all kinds of different places to basically, not let anyone devalue their productive amount of effort they created over so many years. And so that's the largest chunk of money that's going to leave the country in minutes. When I say minutes, I'm really talking about weeks, because that's what happened in Venezuela, and that's what happens in every one of these countries. The largest chunk of money is the one concentrated in the hands of those very few individuals who are also in government or very close to government, and who knows the exact date of when this is going to be done, when they're going to publish the prohibition. They know all the insides of what's coming because they're part of it. And so the only ones that are going to get saved is going to be them. And it so happens that they have, who knows, 80% of the money in the country. And so the only people who end up holding the bag are the people who kept their currency, the local currency, because now they can't trade out of it, just like the Lebanese and all these other people. And eventually they're condemned to lose everything they worked for. And in the case of countries, you have adversaries who are doing exactly the same as you. So if you're the United States, and you have Russia, China, India, Arab countries, all these other players at the currency poker table have the same agenda that you have. The only people they can confiscate property from is their people. And that's what they're doing. But to do that, they have to maintain a consensus so that you don't go crazy, basically taking away support or attacking their currency or their reserves, like what just happened with Russia, or somehow or another taking away from them any power they had previously at the table before you came up with this new situation. And so the way they rearrange the currency poker table is by, what can you do momentarily? Okay, momentarily, I can sell natural gas because I'm the biggest purveyor of natural gas in Europe. And these people without natural gas, they're going to be extremely cold this winter. And they're going to pay me whatever they have to pay me. They have to pay rubles, they will pay rubles. And so guess what? Ruble goes up in price against the dollar, against gold, against anything. Because in reality, what's behind you, your country, is your productive capacity. If that productive capacity happens to be a commodity, well, guess what? That's your productive capacity. If that is millions and millions and millions of laborers like China, well, that's what you got. So what you're really taking at that table is the amount of production that you can use to force everybody else to make the same decisions they've made for the last, I don't know, since 1944. And that game cannot change unless there is a reset of the Nash equilibrium that's been established since 1944. And that's what's interesting to talk about, because the Nash equilibrium it happens to...
Can we just define that too, please?
Sure. Well, it's a solution that applies when you have two or more adversaries playing a game where they cannot increase their payout just by changing their game. If everybody else doesn't change their game. So if everybody else keeps playing the same game with the same strategy that they've played since 1944, I can change my game for a little while, but not for long. Because if I do, I'm going to lose. I'm going to end up losing more than the payoff that I got from changing it. So it requires that the whole group of players changes their game. And they're not going to do that, especially the dominant players, because the game is making them winners for all these years, over 70 years. So what's going to happen is that if somebody comes to the table and realizes that there is a currency out there that doesn't require geopolitical alliances or strategic alliances from the country that makes it, because there is no country behind Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Bitcoin by itself is a geopolitical power.
Mhm.
So you're dealing with sort of like you're dealing with a commodity that your country doesn't produce, and no other country can claim that they produce it or they own it. You're dealing with that commodity that is, it's a free for all right now. And if you realize that that commodity is the only commodity that cannot be stopped from flowing to
Mhm.
you, and it can't, because the whole thing about Bitcoin, and it's what I was saying before, it's unstoppable. It's uncensorable, and it's 100% transferable, meaning the transfer utility of Bitcoin does not exist in any other currency in the world. It's 100% transferable utility, meaning there are no inflationary payments that are coming to you. There are no intermediary, doors that you're gonna have to cross back and forth to get your money again. There are no custody risks. There are so many things that are not in there, that if you are Russia or China or any one of these countries, you're eventually gonna see that this is the only country currency, which is the world currency, that cannot be intervened by a country, that nobody can decide all of a sudden to freeze your Bitcoin reserves. That doesn't happen. So right there, the minute they start, realizing that, the game theory of Bitcoin comes together, because those are the most powerful players in the monetary system now and always. And those are the people who are going to realize that there is a major difference between holding a currency that they can make everybody else pay for, and holding a currency that can be frozen from them at any time or in any place. So countries that are exporting energy, for instance, are going to eventually realize that energy is really the most important commodity in the world, much more than gold, and much more than anything ever since it came along in 1859. So oil is what made the dollar what it is. The reason why the dollar could abandon the gold standard so easily in 1936, and even prohibit people from holding it in 33, and then eventually getting rid of the peg in 71, is because really what has kept the dollar powerful during the last 100 years or so, not just from 1944 on, is two things. One, the incredible power that came from oil, from energy. Energy is the commodity. And the second thing is being very smart about using dollar for financing countries all over the world, and practically putting them on their payroll in that sense. So it's sort of like you have all the people on the table really owe you for real. They owe you because you've been financing them through different sources, IMF, World Bank, whatever, IDB. You created, who knows, 100 multilaterals out there to have them on a leash, basically. So at the table, at the currency poker table, not easy. It's not easy to betray. One, because of your power, and second, because you created a debt monopoly with your currency, which is a very smart move. So what's going to happen here is that whoever comes to that table now and changes the game on his own, regardless of what anybody else does on the table, it's got to be, first of all, a huge energy player. I mean, nobody else can survive doing that, because you can be sure the dominant players at that table are going to take away energy from you on day one. Energy is going to be impossible to end up in your country until you desist. And second, the minute that country does that, because it's an energy producer and it's obviously a pipeline energy producer, anybody else who's been buying energy from him is gonna have to go out there and buy Bitcoin, because the guy doesn't accept anything but Bitcoin. So for him, it's gonna be incredibly cheap to accumulate all the Bitcoin you're giving away, talking badly about it and making stories about it every day in your media, to this guy who's now gonna be resetting the Nash equilibrium, because everyone who deals with them is gonna have to take Bitcoin into reserves to be able to get their oil shipments every day of the week. They're gonna have to build up a reserve in Bitcoin. Suddenly all the second or third, whoever, the other oil player is gonna notice, say, well, guess what? That's the currency my enemy hates? Huh, that currency is my friend. I mean, so it's sort of like all your adversaries, political adversaries in the table are gonna be immediately interested. That's when they're gonna notice that Bitcoin was a huge geopolitical weapon that they could have taken advantage of for what, 10 years now? Because, yeah, not saying 13 and a half because they would have not been aware, but okay, 5 years. But they're gonna get it. I think they got, I know some of the people in those countries, and I know they got some really smart people, and they are the ones that are gonna make those decisions.
That is super interesting and compelling angle on the whole game theory. I've written and talked about this a lot, but never to the intricate detail you just went into there. So let's see. I guess in general, for countries, their export commodities are their leverage, right? It's like that's what the world needs from them, basically. So if there's contention of any kind, you take away what the world needs from you. That's your leverage at the fiat currency poker table or the geopolitical stage, as you said. And again, just to define Nash equilibrium, like it's the default strategy adopted among inherently antagonistic players. So when you're sitting at the poker table, you can't trust all the other players, right? They're all out to get you, you're out to get them. There's kind of a default strategy that's adopted in those conditions. And so obviously this applies to geopolitics where everyone's antagonistic, everyone's looking out for their own interest.
But
And
notice, Robert, one thing to mention is you cannot change it. If you change it on your own, like we're saying it's going to happen here,
right.
You better have energy and Bitcoin.
Yes. Right. So we get to this, and again, just to reinforce the importance of game theory. I hate the term game theory actually, because it sounds like it's something that's theory. Like, no, it is how animals behave. It is how humans behave. I often put it like this, that individual patterns of action are emergent properties of the incentive structures they inhabit, right? We are our incentives. Like, what did Charlie Munger say? Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. It's,
you know what I call it? Behavior dynamics.
Behavior dynamics. It's not theoretical. It's damn near certain, right?
Mathematical.
Yeah, it's mathematical, and it's not objective necessarily, but I think if you just have lived in the world for 2 minutes, you'll know that, like Wu-Tang Clan said, cash rules everything around me, right? Like incentives talk and they move people, obviously. So the benefits of this shift in Nash equilibrium seem like they will accrue to the country that has enough foresight to understand game theory and understand the shift, the potential shift in Nash equilibrium. It's almost like you're just engaging foresight of what is to come. And if simultaneously needs to be a country that can leverage large energy exports, right? Because they can pull the energy and use that as a point of leverage, having, I think, as you said, this was accumulate Bitcoin in advance of pulling the energy, so that now you've accumulated Bitcoin on the cheap, but you're forcing all these other countries that need energy to now go out and acquire Bitcoin to buy your energy. So you've basically flipped the game board over on them. And
well, I see it as though you're gonna get all that Bitcoin. They need their energy. So even if you don't accumulate it at the beginning, you're gonna get it. People need energy to live. And second, no matter what you do with all Bitcoin, you're gonna be in a situation like the people who bought Bitcoin back in 2011 or 2012. You're gonna be the biggest accumulator of Bitcoin receipts from all places in the world, and the biggest transactor in Bitcoin from there on against anybody else. I mean, whoever thinks is a Bitcoin billionaire is gonna be small potatoes compared to you. You're gonna be the biggest guy in the market.
yeah, that's a great point. And then the other, I guess the last wrinkle I would add to this is that shift in demand, the preponderance of demand shifts away from, let's say, the petrodollar as the means for settling global energy to Bitcoin. You've put tremendous downward pressure on the purchasing power of that currency.
Yes, sir.
And you've put tremendous upward pressure on the purchasing power of Bitcoin. And so this could really trigger a hyper Bitcoinization like event, right? Where we talk about this, we've called it a lot of different things. Hyper Bitcoinization, which is like the opposite of hyperinflation in a way, like instead of money collapsing in purchasing power, Bitcoin would be ascending in purchasing power at some exponential rate. Could be kind of this reverse bank run on Bitcoin, I think is a term that Safety has used, where every bank in the world just suddenly realizes, holy shit,
that's going to happen.
This game just flipped, and like we all need to scramble to get as much of this as we can. All the while, the supply of Bitcoin is unchanged, right? Like with any other commodity in the world, there would be this huge incentive as a result of this shift to produce more of the thing, whether it's gold or oil or whatever. But again, unique to Bitcoin, it's the only asset in the world that there will ever be with an absolutely fixed supply. So you're going to have all of this exponentially surging demand hitting an immovable supply curve. And I think it's just going to be a frenzy, honestly. And
that's what happens when you shift the Nash equilibrium. And that's very hard to reset. Mm-hmm. But this thing is a miracle. This thing has all the ingredients that you need to reset something like the currency Nash equilibrium. That, I never thought that could happen in my lifetime. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the second step function that happens mathematically with Bitcoin is this, not public adoption. I mean, that I've said that already 3 or 4 times because I've been saying it for a while. And as long as we keep talking to the public, I don't think we're gonna help that happen. Okay, so I think we need to start talking to people who understand mathematics.
Well, who knows who's listening to this, but it sure is fun to talk about these ideas. And maybe this is a bit abstract. We're talking about Nash equilibrium and game theory and whatnot, but just to kind of try to bring it down to earth, we've seen shifts in the Nash equilibrium a lot in military, let's say, right? Like once your enemy invents air power, fighter jet or whatever it is, you are absolutely ruined against your enemy if you don't step up to that technological plate, right? You better have air power if your enemy has air power. You better have a machine gun if your enemy has machine guns. You better have a cannon if your enemy has cannons. It's that type of advance. So, yeah. Wow, what a great run. Oswaldo, this has been one hell of a conversation. I really enjoyed it. This game theory, again, the game theoretic aspects of Bitcoin, I think, are just where the light bulb moment occurred for me originally. And I think it's difficult to understate the importance of looking at the world in this way. So the predator-prey dynamics, the lens on the world makes so much sense. And I hope that this conversation leads people to be more curious about, the nature of property and the way socioeconomics are structured. So yeah, again, just thank you a lot. I really appreciate that. Would you please let my audience know where they can find out more about you or your work?
Sure. I've been publishing all of these thoughts for the past 20 years in a website that has the name of my previous business broker in Venezuela. I used to run, after I left banking, I set up my own a stockbroker in Venezuela. And we mainly dealt with, basically financial transaction back and forth. And the name is Sequoian, like the sequoia tree, but it's got an N at the end, sequoian.com. That's where I publish all my writings. And I'm going to be republishing 3 Bitcoin writings that for some reason somehow were unpublished a few weeks ago. But I'm going to be republishing them because they tell you exactly what happened. How did I get into Bitcoin and why? And you will see there why I went from trying to find a solution for systemic banking risks. Because back in the 80s, when I was in Citibank and then in these other places, I decided to eventually leave for a couple of years, actually for a year, and do a master in basically in finance and all the concepts that I felt in computing that I needed, because I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the computing world back then. But after that, and I went to Carnegie Mellon, which I think is the best university for anything related to computer science. I met with the creator of triple book entry accounting. I mean, this is the genius that comes after 500 years to create the accounting that is behind Bitcoin's setup. That accounting has been around since he created it and published this book in 1989. He was one of my teachers. By the way, he was our accounting teacher. There you go. Right. And this guy, eventually his triple entry booking accounting was picked up by another computer guy who's really, really smart, Ian Script, I can't remember the name, in 2005. And eventually it was picked up by Satoshi, obviously. But it was amazing how since the time I left Carnegie Mellon until he died in 2007, I was really mad that the whole world hadn't recognized this thing was going to wipe out banking systemic risk. And the reason why it wipes it out, let me tell you, it's very important to understand what Bitcoin is resolving here. The mathematical accounting, not just all the other things that we just talked about, but the mathematical accounting is that when you have double entry accounting, you need a third party to audit your books,
right?
Because there's always a counterpart to those 2 sets of numbers, and the counterpart is the liability guy on the other side or the creditor on the other side. So everybody's books need to be audited, all of them. And one thing is that I come from the banking world, and we tend not to believe in anyone, period. Okay. and this is for real. We have to verify everything. And the solution this guy gave me was, hey, we don't need auditors anymore. I don't believe auditors. That's that was really my issue. I could not believe certain books and certain bonds that were being issued, and I didn't believe the auditors, and therefore I got into situations where I don't believe those auditors. Period. I'm not gonna buy it. Whatever. This guy solved my problem because now we were gonna have triple entry accounting, and because of triple entry accounting, you don't need banks anymore to depend on each other for a domino crash among them. You don't need to have ever again systemic risk because it's not depending on your books that I'm placing my money with you. You understand? I'm lending you money or I'm buying your bonds. You, if you're a corporate or a bank or a government, whoever you are, now I'm looking at transparency and to make my decision on whether or not to hold your treasury bonds or to hold your corporate bonds. Or I'm not going to make it based on S&P or some auditor I don't believe in. I'm going to base it on mathematical entries that take away all the systemic risk from you, from me, and from all of our countries. But guess what? That's obviously not something they were interested in. Because Yehudi died in 2007, being a total unknown.
Wow. That I did not know that.
And then I picked up Bitcoin because I saw somebody talking about triple entry accounting in Bitcoin. No way. How could an unknown guy, who disappears? And I wrote, this is the article that I wrote that I'm going to rewrite, because in that article I say that I could not believe some hacker who was able to master TBE, triple entry accounting, would abandon his creation. That just didn't make any sense. That sounded like a hack to me. So.
That's it though. Yeah, it's I guess the integration of proof of work to everything else that is Bitcoin that really did solve triple entry bookkeeping. And wow, yeah, thank God for that, for all the reasons we've laid out today. Oswaldo, thank you again. We'll have to do another conversation because this information is too important to keep in our heads. So I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much. And I'll send you that article specifically because you're gonna feel the emotion. I look forward to that.